the reality is immigrants are far more likely to be entrepreneurs than the average Canadian.
Right now, I think the number is 40% of immigrants start a business within 10 years. If we move a little bit forward to Canada and our culture has never been one of entrepreneurship. It's been one of sell the trees, trade, get the First Nations to hunt and sell the pelts, dig up some diamonds or dig up some oil and sell it. We're not necessarily an entrepreneurial culture, but that's changing, fortunately, because of our immigration population.
We know that today we have 50% less entrepreneurs than we did 20 years ago. We know that there is a looming succession tsunami with our boomers retiring, putting $1.5 trillion worth of businesses at risk. Our proposition is this: we need a new, fresh, future-focused business immigration framework, one that is growth-oriented and support-based, that can attract and retain the kind of entrepreneurs that Canada needs so we can have a bully-proof future.
We know that more than 90% of private sector employment is with small, medium enterprises, and we know that often our economic and innovation strategies focus, in my view, too much on what large businesses need, even though they account for only 10% of private sector employment, ignore what small businesses and entrepreneurs need.
Think about all these small businesses where the owners are closing up. They're fixing air conditioning and heating systems, and they're plumbers. And why don't we encourage plumbers from the UAE to come in and take over those companies? Why don't we have a system whereby you've got a company for sale and you can somehow sell it to an immigrant? We have a point system now that is nothing short of chaotic. Certainly not designed to encourage entrepreneurs. It's designed to, I'm not actually sure what it's designed for. It's designed for people that wait a long time and they get frustrated talking to bots.
I think we need to think of this as a systems issue. It's not just about who we bring in, it's also about how we support them once they're here, and recognizing, again, as I said at the outset, and you also said, that entrepreneurship is the lifeblood of the Canadian economy. It is, and our immigrant entrepreneurs are our secret weapon when it comes to finding new markets and new opportunities globally as we're facing a trade war with the US.
By two extraordinary leaders whose work sits at the intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation, and inclusion. Professor Wendy Cukier and Professor Benson Honek. Wendy is a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at the Ted Rogers School of Management, founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute at the TMU, academic director of the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and academic research director of the Future Skills Center. Wendy has been recognized with many awards for her work, including, but not limited to, the King Charles III Coronation Medal, Canada's Meritorious Service Cross, YWCA Woman of Distinction Award, and a Metropolis Canada Research Award. Benson is the chair in entrepreneurial leadership at the School of Business at McMaster University, director of the Center for Research on Community-Oriented Entrepreneurship, co-founder of the Reframery, and a board member of the Africa Academy of Management. Benson is a globally recognized scholar, having published over 100 peer-reviewed articles in leading journals. He currently serves on 10 editorial boards, including AMLE, AMD, JBV, JMS, and ETMP. As always, a full introduction would take far more time than we have today, so I invite you to check our website to find links to our guests' work and follow their ongoing contributions to Canada and beyond. Wendy and Benson, thank you very, very much both for being here and, of course, for your continued and impressive leadership. If I may, I'm going to start with a proposition. I'm going to put forward a proposition so we can start discussing it. We believe that Canada must re-engineer its economic immigration policy for long-term economic growth. We're not doing that. The current system is falling short, especially as far as business immigration is concerned. We know that entrepreneurship is the bedrock of Canadian economy. At the same time, we know that the entrepreneurial rate is declining at an alarming rate. We know that today we have 50% less entrepreneurs than we did 20 years ago. And today we know that there is a looming succession tsunami with our boomers retiring, putting $1.5 trillion worth of businesses at risk. And if you read the reports, they are saying that their number one concern for succession is lack of a suitable successor or lack of a suitable buyer. So one would assume in this context, we need business immigration policies that can revitalize this ecosystem. But unfortunately, we're not doing that. Only 0.2%, 0.2, so that's less than 0.5% of all economic immigrant admission in Canada are from the entrepreneurial class. And in that class, we only have one program, startup visa program, which makes applicants wait in line for 40 months. So our proposition is this: we need a new, fresh, future-focused business immigration framework, one that is growth-oriented and support-based, that can attract and retain the kind of entrepreneurs that Canada needs so we can have a bully-proof future. Because all those things that I just mentioned were independent of a Trump problem that we recently have. So at the bottom of this proposition lies an assumption that entrepreneurship is important for long-term prosperity, and Canada urgently needs more entrepreneurs. So I'm going to put this to you, Wendy. What do you think about these assumptions and these propositions?
I think I would agree with most of what you're saying. So we know that more than 90% of private sector employment is with small, medium enterprises. And we know that often our economic and innovation strategies focus, in my view, too much on what large businesses need, even though they account for only 10% of private sector employment, and ignore what small businesses and entrepreneurs need. So I think that's very, very true. I think as well, I'm not one of the people that thinks our immigration system was ever broken. I think it needs repairs. And I do agree with you that the admission criteria that are currently prioritized don't necessarily align either with employment requirements or with entrepreneurship. What I would say, though, that I think is critically important is in the current environment with the trade wars looming with the US, immigrants are a competitive advantage. And so you're absolutely right that a small percentage of immigrants are admitted under the entrepreneurship programs, but the reality is immigrants are far more likely to be entrepreneurs than the average Canadian. And that has to do with the fact that a lot of economic class immigrants who come to Canada are pushed or pulled into entrepreneurship. And we could talk more about that. So I think we are admitting lots of immigrants who are becoming entrepreneurs, even at higher rates than native-born Canadians, but they're not being admitted through the entrepreneurship routes. And I have a PhD student looking at startup visa, and it definitely has limitations. The final thing that I wanted to underscore is that we see immigrants as the key to success in Canada, and a lot of the discourse that I think has led to rapid changes in policy that are not evidence-based is very much a function of anti-immigrant discourse that we're seeing spill over the border. And so it's critically important to re-emphasize a number of the points that you made. And you're absolutely right that the succession planning, especially in smaller communities, is very, very critical to our survival, and immigrants are part of the solution. I can give you one concrete example. I led a big initiative around private sponsorship of Syrian refugees, and we settled some in Picton, Ontario, because you could afford the housing. It was a family of 14, and one of them started working at a local fishing company as part of his job. And guess what? Last year, he was trying to raise the money to take over the fishing company because he knew more than anyone in the community, and he had such a good relationship with the owner. We've got lots of those kinds of stories, even where refugees have set up businesses. Peace by Chocolate is the third biggest employer in Antigonish now. So I think it's important to recognize that regardless of the class of newcomers are more likely to be entrepreneurs, and they create jobs. They don't take jobs from Canadians.
Perfect. Lot to unpack there, but I want to go to Benson to I want your ideas about the proposition and the assumptions, and then we go to some of the points that Wendy raised.
Sure. So I agree with a lot of what you stated. First, I'll start with the point that trying to target entrepreneurs specifically is a very, very dubious project. To try for a government to try and predict who's going to be the most successful entrepreneur is really just not a likely proposition. So the up until now, the visas that we've had for entrepreneurs are really like golden visas, the ones they're talking about in the US or in Malta. That's for people that have enough money that they can go through the hoops and buy a franchise and pretend to be an entrepreneur, hire a bunch of Canadians for a year or two. These are not entrepreneurs. These are people that have already made their money somewhere else. They're retiring to Canada. They're getting a passport, and that's really what it's about. We're selling passports. Could the government predict and choose who's an entrepreneur? I don't think so. I don't think that's possible. If you take a look at where where there's a high propensity of entrepreneurship around the world, you'll find it's places where, for particular geographical reasons and particular ecosystem reasons, they attract entrepreneurs or produce entrepreneurs. But the governments are never involved in choosing which ones are gonna fly and which ones aren't, right? So typically, you'll find, Silicon Valley. It's with B1 visas, people are getting special visas because they've got certain competencies, or they're going to the high-tech universities, Stanford, Berkeley, and they're going in that direction, right? So those are the ways that happens. And if you look at the other ecosystems, it has to do with the unique characteristics of the environment. So if we move a little bit forward to Canada and our culture has never been one of entrepreneurship. It's been one of sell the trees, trade, get the First Nations to hunt and sell the pelts, dig up some diamonds or dig up some oil and sell it. We're not necessarily an entrepreneurial culture, but that's changing, fortunately, because of our immigration population. So right now, I think the number is 40% of immigrants start a business within 10 years. There's a famous adage, the safest place to have a heart attack is probably in a taxi in Toronto. And the reason is the taxi cab driver is probably a doctor from Pakistan or India who's not able to practice. Now, that's another question, and that has to do with our messing up our entrepreneurial class because we make credentialing very, very difficult. We make it difficult for people. So if you're an engineer, if you know how to build a bridge in Pakistan or India, a bridge is a bridge. Okay, so you should be able to build a bridge more or less in Canada. We want to verify that you really know what you know, but we've made it almost impossible for someone to transfer those qualifications. So imagine all the potential engineering companies or medical companies that could be started by these people that are highly qualified, but are not recognized by our system, nor are they particularly recognized by the immigration system. We have a point system now that is nothing short of chaotic. Every couple of years we change it. There's no logic to our point system. It's great to have a point system. We're much better than our neighbors down south that don't have one at all. But it's certainly not designed to encourage entrepreneurs. It's designed to, I'm not actually sure what it's designed for. It's designed for people that wait a long time and they get frustrated talking to bots. That's basically what the system is designed for. So if we want to attract entrepreneurs, and I agree with you 100% on the point of aging population. We're doing now with the Reframery, our virtual incubator. We're working with elderpreneurs, we're working with people 55 and over, but we're also in the process where we can help transition people into taking over some of these businesses. Just as an example, a typical incubator costs a couple $1 million a year to run, and we're doing this virtually at a fraction, maybe 1% of those costs, right? So there are ways that we can support entrepreneurship. Immigration is one, and we can certainly make the most of the immigrants that we have. I think recognizing their qualifications would be one way. I think throwing out our buy your way into Canada program and come up with a sane, rational, who's going to be the successful entrepreneur is almost impossible to predict. 10 to 15% of any population are probably entrepreneurial. That's going to be just a general average across the board. A lot of entrepreneurs are more risk taking. That's why they're willing to leave the countries of origin. Obviously, some of them have to leave, some of them want to leave. But the bottom result is we can't predict it. All we can do is create an ecosystem to support those people that are in the system. And for that, we are just woefully inadequate in terms of supporting that population. And that's really where we should put our energy in.
Okay, that gave me a lot of excitement because Benson is essentially saying, hey, what you're doing is useless. We can never get it, right? You're saying, hey, we can't really select the kind of entrepreneurs we want. And if we can't really select them, then, it stands to argue that we can't measure them. But let's unpack that. And I think let's zoom in. One of the things that Wendy mentioned is the push and pull factor. And Benson, you have touched upon this in your research. Both of you agree that entrepreneurship by necessity is something that is very, very visible in the immigrant population, right? So an immigrant comes here, they realize, hey, I came here, I uprooted my life, I came here because I thought I can go integrate into this labor market, but this labor market discriminates against me worse than IRCC discriminated against me in the selection process. So what am I gonna do, right? I gotta do something. So I get pushed towards entrepreneurship, right? But that journey, and a lot of international students do that too. We make a person who wants to be an entrepreneur in Canada to take not a straight path, but we put them through a maze in which we are, exhausting them of their psychological capital. And of course, we're exhausting them of their hard capital, right? So if I want to be an entrepreneur in Canada, why do I have to spend $100,000 in getting an education that I may not necessarily need, right? So give me an entrepreneurial pathway so I can come with that. So I want to go back to Benson because you are saying we can't really have an entrepreneurial program that gives a direct path to Canadian entrepreneurship to immigrants. So based on what you're saying and Wendy's saying and what I'm saying, what are the chances that we can actually come up with something workable? Or alternatively, tell me what are the challenges are so we can discuss those challenges and see how we can overcome them.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just broadly speaking, research that we've done has shown that if we talk about human capital, someone with more formal education, okay, they're not necessarily advantaged in the long run. They might be more likely to get capital, but they're not necessarily more likely to endure, right? They're not necessarily, because that takes tenacity, that takes persistence. Sometimes, if you take a look at the billionaire class, there are a lot of college dropouts in the billionaire class, right? So, being an entrepreneur is not the same as someone who sticks with a university degree. Now, I do like the fact that we bring in smart immigrants. That's great. That's fabulous. And now I guess we're bringing in a combination of smart immigrants and immigrants that know how to do practical trades. That's good too. They have jobs. That's fine. But if we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're really talking about people that 15% of the population that are willing to take risks, that are driven for whatever reason, and we don't really know. They're driven to have autonomy. They don't want to be told what they want, what to do. I'm kind of like wired that way myself. I don't like bosses. I never have like bosses. I've always had businesses my entire life. And I think certain entrepreneurs are like that. They're people that don't necessarily fit into the mold. And what we're doing is we're taking immigrants and we're asking them to fit into the mold. So we want people to come in and be the classic students, and then they're going to magically turn into the classic entrepreneurs. And I think that's the mistake. You're asking a bigger question, which is how do we determine who do we select for immigration processes, right? Clearly, there is an advantage for language that we've studied and verified everywhere, which is if you're not fluent in the local language, that's a handicap for you being an entrepreneur. Doesn't mean it's a disaster. You can get through it, but then you're going to have to learn because your customers are speaking that language, right? So, taking in someone who doesn't speak the language, that's a challenge. And you see a lot of the settlement organizations do that. They create language training for business people or language training to help people move through the business environment. But we could be selecting on other issues like, have you ever started a business? Do you come from a family of entrepreneurs, right? There are things that we could choose that we know have a propensity to increase if that's our goal, if what we're trying to do. But what about, think about all these small businesses where the owners are closing up. They're fixing air conditioning and heating systems and they're plumbers. And, why don't we encourage plumbers from the UAE to come in and take over those companies? Why don't we have a system whereby you've got a company for sale and you can somehow sell it to an immigrant who can come in, who can be fast tracked to buy that company and take over it? That makes sense. That would work, right? That links, instead of saying we're only going to take people who are tradesmen, who we know, and then they have to have a job. Why don't we say we're going to take immigrants in who are ready to take over these small businesses, and then we're solving two problems at the same time. We're bringing in entrepreneurs. We're finding a transition from these very small businesses that Wendy referred to and that you referred to, that where people are aging out because their kids want to become lawyers. Their kids don't want to take over the business, right? But listen, my air conditioning breaks. I need someone to fix it, right? So I don't really care who that person is. If they come from UAE or India or Pakistan, why do I care? If they know how to do the job, that's what matters most. And if they're willing to, maybe that the government can help with some partial sponsorship for the capital. We can say, we can create a bond system where maybe we sell bonds and we say, okay, this money is going to be used to help outside entrepreneurs buy Canadian companies. And they're going to pay back the bond, they're going to pay back through the loan through interest. And we have invested as Canadians in a bond project to bring in the right kind of immigrants. Everyone's a winner. The government wins. We, the taxpayers and the individuals win. The small business, it's a total, but that's a rational process that
Okay.
could really let the
Perfect.
market work for us. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay, so Wendy, Benson just listed a lot of factors that we can use for selecting the entrepreneurs that has the most chance of success in Canada, right? So we're kind of in program design. Like, who is the ideal entrepreneur for Canada? Benson said language is one thing. Entrepreneurial experience is another. Persistence, continuity, right? Entrepreneurship is like, fail fast, do it more, do it more, do it more. So capital is there. What are your thoughts about designing a selection metric for a potential entrepreneurial program for Canada?
I think, as I said, I think it's complex. And I agree with much of what Benson said, with a couple of caveats. One is the way in which language skills are defined varies quite considerably. And we've done research that shows, despite what people say, there isn't actually a correlation between standardized language training and employment, for example. And part of it is with the current provincial nominee program, for example, you have to be at level 7 for most of the jobs. I have people who have worked for me for 5, 10 years, can't hit level 7. So I think we also like language training skills assessments, massive, massive challenge through the entire system. And I would argue that we need some measures of competency in language, but you don't need a PhD in English to hit the targets. So I think we have to take a pragmatic approach to language skill assessments. I think that's one thing. I think looking at the history someone has as a business person makes sense. And certainly looking at whether they have capital also makes sense. So I don't disagree that we could refine the entrepreneurial class so it's less of a buying your way in. But I want to come back to the fact that regardless of that, and regardless of the point that some people come to Canada to be doctors or engineers and find that they're pushed into entrepreneurship because they're excluded from work because of credential recognition, and that's a whole nother thing we need to address. We also need to recognize that a lot of the entrepreneurs, the economic entrepreneurs that come to Canada, are pulled into entrepreneurship. They see an opportunity. They want to work. They're like Benson or me. They don't want to work for someone else. They want more flexibility. And I think where we need to really drill in is the current settlement service networks that exist. And I don't mean to disrespect people who I know work really hard and have their hearts in the wrong place, but only 30% of immigrants use settlement agencies. And what we found in our research is it's inversely related to education. So the more highly skilled someone is, the less likely they are to use settlement agencies. The other thing is a lot of settlement agencies are populated by people who've only worked in settlement agencies. They don't have experience working in industry. They most certainly don't have experience working as entrepreneurs. And the whole idea that an immigrant wants to be an entrepreneur is alien to them. And it's only been fairly recently that that's even considered as a pathway. So I would argue we have issues with our criteria and selection, but we also have issues with people who come here, want to start businesses, who need more support and guidance and help navigating very complex systems, who are discriminated against by banks and financial institutions. And that's across the board. I mean, both sides of the border. My daughter went to New York and had to be put on her husband's or her partner's credit card in order to establish a credit history in the United States. So there's a lot of stuff in the financial sector which has an impact on immigrants' ability to get rental accommodation because they can't do the credit checks that are required, have an impact on their ability to access loans and so forth. So there's that piece that we have to consider. We also have to look at the training and support systems. And I would actually argue that a lot of the ethnic business associations, Canada Pakistan Business Council, Canada India Foundation, Black Business Professional Association, Federation for African Canadian Economics, do a much better job of supporting and acting as intermediaries in the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem than the settlement agencies ever have. And so I think we need to think of this as a systems issue. It's not just about who we bring in, it's also about how we support them once they're here, and recognizing, again, as I said at the outset, and you also said, that entrepreneurship is the lifeblood of the Canadian economy. It is, and our immigrant entrepreneurs are our secret weapon when it comes to finding new markets and new opportunities globally as the border, as we're facing a trade war with the US. So to me, you have to look at all parts of this process. And then, of course, the skills and supports. Like we work with, there's also a real bias in Canada where we think entrepreneur, we think tech. And of course, tech companies tend to be higher growth. But fun fact, health and beauty sector companies grow faster, lower failure rates, and export more than tech. Tech has very high failure rates, and yet those sectors are often completely overlooked. And often entrepreneurs have really good, there's a number of South Asian entrepreneurs, for example, have really capitalized on food market opportunities and grown tremendously as a result. We have to make sure that we're sector agnostic and we understand that entrepreneurs are right across sectors. They're not just in tech, and make sure that we've got the supports in place. Farmers are entrepreneurs. We have a massive issue with succession planning in the agriculture sector that lots of international people could help us solve. And as we need more self-sufficiency around food, really, really important. So I think, in my mind, you take an ecosystem approach. You look at the policies, you look at the entry level issues, but you also have to look at the support systems that are in place and where the barriers are and where the enablers are, what works, what doesn't. And there's a lot of shakeup that's required there. And then you also have to really get to the individuals, not just the individual entrepreneurs and helping build their competencies, but the gatekeepers and the decision makers who often are picking people in their own image. Like, I don't know about you, Benson, but we have entrepreneurship textbooks that don't have a single woman, don't have a single newcomer, even though we know they're overrepresented in the in the sector. And we tend to teach about tech success stories more than looking broadly at what entrepreneurship actually is. So to me, it's we need a kind of systems approach to recognizing, valuing, and supporting immigrant entrepreneurs from start to finish.
No, that's exactly what you also concluded in that paper. We need a holistic approach. And I think I'm in 100% agreement that I think more should be focused on support that we give the entrepreneurs than it is how we select them. Because if we do selection wrong and we give good support, we can compensate, right? And in your paper, you go, in that paper that I think it was published in 2017, which should have been a gold mine for any policymaker thinking about, hey, how should I design an entrepreneur program? You go and you list like the considerable and distinct barriers to immigrant entrepreneurs, right? And you start, there's a list, you just told us some of them, but like obtaining financing as a major challenge, 63% said that, right? And Benson kind of alluded to that. It's like, hey, let's provide a financing solution to these entrepreneurs, right? There is challenges understanding legislation, regulation, and taxes. 68% are crying over that. So a good program design that puts them in charge with a lawyer who knows all these regulations. So from day one, you're paired with a lawyer who can solve that problem of you. That's a good design solution.
And think about it. If you're in tech, you need the lawyer for IP protection, for example. If you're in food, you need to understand regulatory health and safety standards. So it's very sector specific as well. Sorry for interrupting.
No. Of course, please, by all means. This is a roundtable, right? So let's just jump in whenever we want, because we gotta get like to some concrete solutions. So what is important is for support. We know that immigrant entrepreneurs, first of all, they're more likely to be entrepreneurs, and both of you, based on your research, you tend to agree they bring a lot. Like Benson in his paper is saying, hey, they're bringing a new frame of mind. They tend to be more export oriented, all the things that we need. So they have the potential, they have what we need, but let's focus on that support. Because Wendy, what you're saying is just so disappointing to me as a Canadian. $6.5 billion of our budget goes to IRCC. Out of that budget, I think about 50% goes to settlement services. So 50% of that says $3 billion we're paying on settlement services, and you're saying 30% are using them. And here's another thing. In your paper, you're saying these settlement services are lost. You surveyed them in this paper. You surveyed them and they're saying, hey, we're just good with, helping with some language, resumes, and labor market. We don't know the needs for an entrepreneur. We're not built for this. So this is a problem. Benson, you have something to say.
Yeah, the two things I want to point out. And one is that the government and the public think entrepreneurship, they think Shopify, they think Facebook, they think Google. This is not the reality. 99% of entrepreneurship is just basic small business, right? Which we have a lot of in Canada, which is very suitable for a lot of immigrants, which doesn't require the crazy hyper, venture capital investments that people often think of. So first of all, the word, there's a problem with the word. We have to define what we're talking about. All right. I think Wendy and I agree that when we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about people starting independent businesses. We're not talking about the billionaire class because they're going to come out of something one way or another. The government won't have anything to do with it. Wendy or I won't have anything to do with it. Those things are going to happen because they're very rare. That's like getting hit by lightning. You can't predict where the lightning will strike. Okay? So if we're talking about the majority of people, then we need to be thinking about how to build up those businesses from the ground up. And settlement organizations, they're great. You got to realize a lot of people that get support from the settlement organizations are refugees. They're not all economic immigrants. A lot of them are here because they're traumatized. They've gone through all kinds of terrible things. And for them, just getting a regular job is about the most that they can help for. And really what we're saying as Canadians when we bring in refugees is the expectation that maybe their children will enter the economy and perform well, because we can't expect a lot out of a refugee that's been traumatized and abused. And
Benson, we cannot select them. With refugees, we don't have. See, refugees is a different class.
Right.
You know why? Because when somebody comes to me as a refugee, I'm saying, hey, I'm not looking at how you can contribute to me. Out of compassion and out of moral duty, I have just to verify that your claim is legitimate. Then I accept, regardless of your ability, regardless of your pocket size. But with economic immigration, we have the privilege. I would argue that it's immoral, but hey, let's stick to pragmatism here. But with economic immigrants, we get to select them. We have the choice, right, to select who comes.
Okay, so 100%. So let's call the settlement organization better for refugees. And let's say that we don't really have a fantastic process to integrate economic immigrants. Let's just argue that. And I would accept that. I think Wendy's saying that, and I would accept that fully. We could. Now, what we have now, if you're an entrepreneur, you can go to an incubator. Their budgets are a couple $1 million a year. And they might help 30 companies, 40 companies a year at most. We could do a lot better than that. That's one issue. Another issue is right now we're in the process of trying to digitize and come up with a virtual mentorship program. Because no matter who you are, when you're an immigrant, a small business, having a mentor is a fantastic opportunity to learn in a personalized way what you need to do to start your business. So there are so many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Canadians that have retired. They may be small business people that sold their business. They may be people that have an expertise, be they lawyers or accountants or whatever, that they're willing to share, because Canadians are very generous. And what we need, what we're hoping to build, is a system to create a virtual mentorship program so that we can mentor these potential entrepreneur, these economic migrants, to support them in starting their business. Because you know something, the biggest asset that these incubators provide is really mentorship and networking. That's really the biggest thing they provide. Everything else is probably, and rarely are they inhabited by entrepreneurs. Mostly they're a class of managers, real estate managers. They're bureaucrats. So we create what we think we're doing when we help entrepreneurs is we create a bureaucratic organization, or we create government programs that are run by bureaucrats that are the antithesis of entrepreneurship. And what we need to do is connect previous entrepreneurs or existing entrepreneurs with other potential entrepreneurs to create network opportunities. I think we can do that if we dedicate a certain amount of energy or focus in making that happen. And if we do that well, then our future, then this process that we're experiencing with the change in tariffs and the change in market is going to be the best thing that ever happened to Canada. If we do this right, the picture is looking really good.
And Benson, sometimes we can do it with like easy program design techniques. For example, when you want to buy a business, right? I'm a lawyer. If you come to me, it's like, I want to buy a business. I'm like, one of the conditions that you have to really consider putting in there, ask for management to stay for a transition period, right? We have all these businesses going out of business. Have the entrepreneurs, the foreign entrepreneurs come buy them, and they get the most amazing, the mentorship that they want from the current business owner. But if you look at the program design, at the federal level, we don't have anything to buy a business. Okay, so put federal aside. But then we come to Ontario. We had an Ontario immigration program for entrepreneurs. They closed it down in December 2023 because it couldn't even attract 2 or 3 nominees. Why? Because if you look at it, it's like 100 pages of the hoops that they have to jump through. And when I, as a lawyer, I'm saying, okay, don't worry about the 100 pages. That's my job to help you navigate this. But hey, do you know that nothing is for certain? You're bringing your capital, you're bringing your life, you're bringing everything you have. And at the end of the day, you're signing a performance agreement that is not even open to renegotiation. So you can lose everything in a blink of an eye. And then we expect, hey, where are these entrepreneurs? So back to Benson's point, that so much of program design, so much of program support are not being handled by the right profile of people. That's one thing. And Wendy, there's another thing that is interesting from your research. You're saying, hey, they're culturally detached too. Like, if I want to provide support, and that's what, Wendy, you said, you're like, money is better spent if we go to give it to, hey, Canada-Pakistan Business Association, right? Because if Pakistanis are helping Pakistanis, they don't have that cultural gap. But come to the Startup Visa program and look at the Startup Visa program. I think out of 90 designated organizations, we only have one that is culturally relative to a sector that they're attracting. So, Wendy, if support, we agree that support is the best thing. But now, if we want to be practical, so the first thing that you would change in our support structure, what would you do based on what we have? So would that be redirecting of the funds that we get to settlement services? How would you do it? What's the first thing that you would change?
So, through the Future Skills Center, one of the things we've been trying to do is assess better what works, for whom, and why. And so just on the mentorship thing, we did an evaluation. I think there were 10,000 participants in a program called Mindframe Connect that was a mentorship program run across incubators in Canada. And what we found is it worked well for certain segments of the population. Didn't work so well for women and didn't work so well for others because the curriculum, the approach, even the people who were the mentors tended to be one sort, right? And so if you've got people who want to go into food, you've got people who want to go into tech, you've got people who want to just buy a store and resell, you've got tradespeople who want to set up a business, whatever. You need to take into account stage of development. Are they just beginning? Are they an established entrepreneur looking to purchase business? Those two groups need something very, very different. Are they someone with an invention they want to commercialize? Like, you really have to be super clear about, I agree with Benson, we need a broad definition of entrepreneur, but then we have to segment that and understand the different kinds of entrepreneurs and the stages that we're at. And then you have to take into account, frankly, the identity issues. So we run programs specifically for women. We run programs for immigrant women. We run programs for Black women that are separate from the programs for Black people. And remember, the Black population, 60% are immigrants, because the needs in terms of confidence building, skill building, all of those things need to be tailored a little bit. We ran a program for immigrant women in Halifax, and we offered childcare and food. And it made a huge difference in
Of course.
participation, completion, and so on. We ran a program for Black youth, and we made sure their transportation was paid for. Like, there are little things in the wraparound supports. And as Benson mentioned, sometimes you're dealing with people who have trauma. I would disagree that we should write off refugees, because in fact, the research shows refugees tend to be more successful as entrepreneurs than others, because resilience is such a critical factor in entrepreneurial success. And if you think about, refugees are people who give up everything for a new future. So, we could dig in on that a little bit more. But the first piece needs to be evidence-based understanding of what the needs are by stage, by sector, and by population. And then we need to look at, quite honestly, the mess, the dog's breakfast of programs that we have. We have so many Entrepreneur 101 courses and incubators and accelerators that don't share information, don't work together. And I think there are huge opportunities for platforms, right? For more shared resources. Instead of everybody developing Entrepreneurship 101, we should have core curriculum that can be tailored and modules that can be shared, instead of everybody developing their own, come meet a VC. What I would love to see is a national platform. We have a little Ask Give platform. I need this. I have this. Right. Because right now, with a lot of the entrepreneurship investments and opportunities, it's like dating. Like, you go to the bar on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but your perfect match was there Tuesday and Thursday. We do not have in Canada a way of linking the entrepreneur in Halifax with the investor in, Picton, where there's an obvious match, because so much of it is random. And post COVID, we're seeing a little more stuff, but I think we need to think about platforms, and then we need to look at who we fund and why we fund, and make sure there's robust evaluation and outcome measurement. Because I can tell you, and we've evaluated, I don't know, dozens of programs, and often the outcome is, oh, I really liked it, and Wendy was great, but there's no actual tracking of, did they become an entrepreneur? And if they didn't become an entrepreneur, were the skills they developed useful in getting employment? Because sometimes entrepreneurship training is actually a really effective form of experiential learning. And you can take someone through an entrepreneurship program, and they might meet a different founder and say, oh, my idea is not as good as your idea. I want to work with you. Or they may come out of it and say, oh, I actually want to go work at a financial institution and help entrepreneurs. So we don't do a good job of figuring out what value these programs are adding and what the outcomes are. And, when I was the vice president of research and innovation, and we had the digital media zone and all that other stuff, you'd see Mars Innovation touting some big company that they claimed that they had supported. And I knew that it had been incubated at the DMZ. So we need more accountability right across the board so that we're investing more effectively. But I would agree with Benson, like, we need to define the problem much more clearly. We need to look at what we've got, where the gaps are, and we need to invest in programs and services that produce results. And those intermediary organizations that are trusted by immigrants, who may not want to go to a government thing or a mainstream, Chamber of Commerce thing, are indispensable partners in designing and implementing these programs.
And they
Because
should
if
be
you're dealing
accountable.
with Black
Benson,
Yeah,
entrepreneurship,
if I could, I'd like to talk about what I agree with on Wendy, what I disagree with.
perfect.
I fully agree on the research end. So just as a matter of a small point, our virtual incubator, we've been focusing on refugees, helping them become entrepreneurs. So I certainly agree that refugees, for the very reasons Wendy stated, are great potential entrepreneurs because they have persistence, they have tenacity, they have a lot of characteristics, and we use something called ingenuity, where we reference constraints help create more opportunity, more creativity. So we've been working with refugees in Kenya, 3 different NGOs. We work in Poland with Ukrainian refugees. They're amazing, right? Where I disagree is that there's a platform, that we could have a national platform. In our activities, we do co-design with every community we work with. So we work with an NGO. If the NGO is working with a certain kind of refugee, we co-design with that NGO and we develop a process, because I agree with Wendy also that you need to be thinking about the matches. You need to be thinking about what level businesses people are starting. You need to be thinking about what industries they're in. And a lot of that is actually dictated by the kind of NGO organization you're working with, right? So it could be anything. If we work with any community organization, and we work in Canada with community NGOs, those NGOs specify for us, they provide a cohort, and then we research. Not only do we work with the NGO, we research before we even start the program. We interview the cohort to find out what their needs are, and then we custom tailor the program to fit those requirements using a co-design model. So I don't think we can have a one model fits all for Canada type of entrepreneurship program or one platform. I think what we need to do is a platform that we can adapt to fit, that we do adapt to fit every niche. So what's necessary at PEI is probably going to be very different than what's necessary in Toronto. And that's almost from everything from A to Z is going to require different inputs. And the trick is, and here's the problem, what we get is we bureaucratize the process, and we get entrepreneurship support people that want to do the same thing over and over. It's too much trouble. First of all, they don't have the skills to do research. So Wendy and I have the skills, but they often don't. So they don't really know. They don't even finance the evaluation of their project because they don't have the money for it. So one thing we could do as a country is say, we're not going to fund any entrepreneurship promotion scheme that doesn't have a research component where we evaluate the effectiveness of that program in a systematic way, right?
I like that because that's a
Whatever it is.
continuous improvement.
There's a platform I would agree with. That's something that could be across Canada, but we have to recognize that what's necessary, the kind of entrepreneurship promotion necessary with one community and any one location is going to be very different from another one, which is going to require completely different design. And that means we have to sit down with them and figure out how to design something that's effective, measure it, refine it, and then maybe we can turn it over to them once we've figured out what really works. Up until now, and like Wendy, I've done research across Canada to look at various incubators. I mean, they're basically real estate salesmen. If you want to start a business, the last thing you want to do is walk into an incubator and be observed under the microscope. Like, why would you? You're an independent person. You want to avoid people studying you.
But Benson, they go there for the support that you mentioned, like for the mentorship and networking. Okay, let's zoom out. This is something interesting here. I like Wendy's idea because it's scalable. And I like the tailor-made specific approach. But here, if we assume that these tailor-made specific approaches are even successful, right? The question is, how can we scale it? And I want to go back to Benson's point that you're saying among the general population, 15% tends to be entrepreneurial. And if I mirror this logic into the economic immigration intake, let's say for the sake of this conversation that we're taking 400,000, so that would be 60,000 entrepreneurs. Now, if I want to design an entrepreneurial program for 15, instead of 0.2%, I'm doing it for 15% of the entire intake. That's 60,000. So I need something scalable. Okay.
Can I give you just one example? I spent many years working in the Middle East. I was in Israel, which is another high-tech nation, right? Startup nation. They had this wave of million and a half Soviet immigrants coming in a very short period. Okay, first they had to teach them the language, so they had language training. Then every single class, every single language training class, someone came in representing a sort of an entrepreneurship promotion, business promotion scheme, and went before everyone who's learning the language, all the Russian immigrants, and said, if you have a business idea, if you think you know something that could be marketable, if you think you have an idea that you'd like to leverage, come talk to me. I will introduce you to the right local Israeli business people that will leverage that. Now, I mean, most cases it came to nothing, but you know what? That happened before Startup Nation. Startup Nation happened partly as a result of that human capital that Israel leveraged, because these people came there with, like, there were engineers, there were scientists, there were professors, and of course they came from a non-market situation where they really couldn't leverage their ideas. The government systematically took advantage of them. We could do the same thing. We could go in front of every settlement language program and say, hey, do you have an idea? Because to Wendy's point, it doesn't matter whether they've got a third grade education or a professor. It doesn't matter. They may be an entrepreneur. They may have some idea. They may have experience. They may have an idea, right? And the thing is to test it, to create an opportunity for them instead of them having to wait 4 or 5 years to figure out everything. And typically it's like a 10-year process before they finally are in the position to start their own business. We could fast track that on a national basis.
So, but that's an awareness of the program. You're saying, because Wendy's research touches on that. They said Wendy is saying so many people don't even know these programs exist. So awareness is one thing, but like, let's assume awareness is there. I'm right now interested in how we can scale this. So let's assume that we can create incubators, accelerators that are based. I love that idea.
Virtual ones. Let's not do bricks and mortar.
They can.
Bricks and mortar is too expensive.
We can discuss that, because I think there's a lot with human connection. You know, when an immigrant is here and I'm here, there's magic can happen that cannot happen in a virtual setting. But let's put the method aside. But for now, I'm saying, okay, so we can design incubators, accelerators. And I'm a fan of university ones because they're backed by this body of research. And for me, research is not good for the sake of research. Research is good if we listen to the research and we can implement what we learn from the research into improving the programs that we have. So far, so good. But how are we going to scale to scale this in a level that it can correspond to the target that we are saying, okay, 15% of economic immigrants? And I want to take you, Wendy, to what is on the ground right now. And let's brainstorm how we can improve this. Right now, startup visa, it's not sector agnostic as we want it to be, because again, this emphasis of high tech, Shopify, Facebook kind of thing is there. But let's say we're talking program design. Let's say we get rid of that. What we have in the startup visa program design is that the government is saying, hey, I don't know who a good entrepreneur is. I don't know how to support them. So I outsource. Who do I outsource to? I create a designation scheme. We used to have one. We no longer have it. That's another policy failure. But hey, we're talking design solution here. So let's say I have a designation scheme under which I can say, hey, if you meet these standards, you become designated. And I, the government, don't have to fund you. I just allow the immigrant entrepreneur to pay you, but I give the immigrant entrepreneur the options to choose among you. So I kind of like liberalize the market. And I let the market decide which incubators do you want to go to get the value that you want. Do you see this model a good scalable model that we, instead of creating those small programs, we create a standard and then we advertise the standard and then people under that standard can become designated? What do you think, Wendy?
Well, so listen, I am one of the people who thinks that there was way too much focus on what the levels weren't. Like, if we bring in an extra 50,000 people, it's like a drop in the bucket. As the boomers are aging out and dying off, and there's no one to pick the grapes, and we have a labor market crisis that was completely obscured by a bunch of moral panic nonsense in the media. So I think when we look at something like a startup visa, however it's designed, it's a small number. So why not open it up and experiment and evaluate what happens instead of micromanaging and trying to control the outcomes. I don't think it's a big risk.
Wendy, they're not
The
doing
other,
that. Sorry to interrupt. They're
sorry,
not doing that. I hope they did that. You see, nobody cares about the program outcome. Like
yeah,
here's I think that's a challenge because if I
yeah,
don't know the out,
and
go ahead.
and
Sorry.
but that's what I mean is we need to be more entrepreneurial in our design and our testing of what works and what doesn't. So I think I would be all for opening it up, having less structure and focusing on outcomes. And the other piece that I would bring in from some of the more successful employment programs I've worked on is pre-arrival. If you're not dealing with refugees who you got to get in here immediately, we could do a much better job of pre-arrival support for potential candidates, whether they're economic immigrants and we need to better shape their expectations, whether we need to build people's competencies in terms of language and all that other stuff, or whether we just want to give them an opportunity to learn more about what it would actually be like to come to Canada with or without their bags of money. So I think one of the things that probably is a gap with things like Startup Canada is the expectations, and this is based on preliminary research from one of my students. The expectations were not managed appropriately. People came without really knowing what they were getting into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that we really need to think about. The other thing in terms of scalability, and just back to the Benson's point about we can't have one size fits all. I agree entirely. But I think there are certain elements that could be shared. Like, how do you do sales projections? That's kind of a module that, regardless of whether you're dealing with, a group of Pakistani um, tech entrepreneurs or the women that we're serving at Scatting Court, like it's kind of, there's going to be some common elements. And why not share those modules? If you're talking about lean canvas, well, yeah, you might do it this way. I might do it that way, but we can pool resources instead of funding individual organizations to redevelop over and over and over and over the same stuff. So all I'm saying is I think there's room for sharing common elements and then customizing. And I think there's room for better matchmaking. Here's what my business idea is. Does anyone have feedback? I think there's more stuff like that we can do at scale, because often, the investor is here and the entrepreneur is there. And that's why I think, we haven't exploited virtual tools as effectively as we could. Canada's tried, like innovation.ca is supposed to help with navigation, but it's too abstract and it's too high level. And so if you can figure out some common, it's not like one size fits all. It's more a network of networks where people share what they've got and what they're doing, and people take what they need as opposed to building from ground zero. And then you
Benson, what do you
common
So
evaluation.
I
what do
just
you think of what do you think about this?
want to
This
remind
is
everyone,
a
first of all, I agree 100% with Wendy's point about can we support people before they come to Canada? 1,000%. We need to create. But okay, I just want to make a point about incubation. 90% of all startups never go near an incubator. And I'll remind you that until incubators were founded some 25, 30 years ago, no businesses got near incubators. The fact of the matter is, incubation itself has become an institution that that propagates and replicates itself and creates a need, and it's not clear to me how great that need is. Okay? And the research is very mixed. I can show you. research suggesting that, you know what? Yeah, people that go through incubators are more likely to survive and probably succeed, but we don't know if it's because the incubators are cherry picking the best businesses or if it's because of the real outcome. I mean,
I agree.
there's extensive research that's done. No one really says incubators are the greatest thing since sliced bread. Okay, so they're around, they exist. 90% of all businesses don't even go near them. I don't think our solution to entrepreneurship in Canada is to make that 90% that go near incubators force them to go into incubators. That's not the point.
But what's the
The point,
definition of an incubator? Because
which
in
is
this,
why, well, okay, there's accelerators, there's
yeah, because but
all
Vincent, here's
kinds
the
of
thing.
things. But any
From
of these institutions that help businesses, I like, or I think Wendy's spot on to say, what can we do for the person that's overseas to get them prepared if they're going to be starting a business in Canada? How can we get them to be prepared as much as possible? Because she and I'm sure, have both seen people arrive in Canada with ideas and fail simply because they really didn't understand the environment they were coming into, thought they were coming to something entirely different. And if they had only talked to a few people or had advance notice, they would have come with a different set of ideas and been more successful. So yeah, I love that idea before. I'm skeptical that we can incubate more success in entrepreneurship. I think the idea of developing networks is a good one. We have every language on earth here in Canada. We should be exporting to every country in the world using that social capital and using that knowledge. That the government could help. The business offices in these various countries could help us establish linkages so that we're exporting to those countries. That is going to help our entrepreneurship a lot more than incubation, which the local incubator, they're thinking, how can you start a business in our local town? They're not thinking of how do you start a business out in, I don't know, Somalia or in wherever. And that's our opportunity. And that's what we should be doing because we've been so lazy selling our stuff to the US. 80 to 85% of our export is to the US. That is absurd. There is no excuse for that. Go to Europe. Go look at what Germany is. 70, 80% of their stuff, it's global. They're not dependent on one country. Why on earth are we dependent on one country for our export? It's mind-boggling stupid when we bring in this diversity. Our goal should be to leverage the diversity to help our entrepreneurs become global entrepreneurs. They come from country X or Y or Z. That's the perfect place to develop an import-export business. That's what we should be helping.
Yeah,
And
that's what you
whether
call
they go to incubator or
transnational
not,
entrepreneur.
it's immaterial. It's immaterial.
Okay,
Anyway,
Vincent, let's dive a little deeper there. Okay, incubation. In the world of business, if I ever refer a client to an incubator, the only reason I'm doing that is for networking. I'm like, if that's where you're gonna meet that investor, if that's where you're gonna meet that mentor who's done this, to me, incubation, acceleration, these are all terms that we play with. At the end of the day, it's all about the networks that you create, right? So that brand name, that name, you pay that incubation fee, but why? Because that Monday when you go there, you gotta meet X and Y, and X and Y, they have a portfolio that may love your business. So forget the terms incubation, accelerator. No, mentorship and networking. Mentorship and networking. We agree that these are something that we want. Now, the idea of pre-arrival gets triggered after selection is successful. Now I want to propose something else. What if I take what Wendy is saying, and I totally agree, there's so many things that are common that we can put it into a curricula, and I tell every prospective immigrant entrepreneur as part of their selection process that, hey, here's a body of courses. This is learning, right? Generals. You need to pass all these modules as one part of your selection criteria. So you can't then come to Canada and say, hi, I didn't know how this worked or how that worked. What do you think about that? Can we
no
take these?
codified knowledge. You can't predict. Like I agree. Wendy pointed out, the books are full of junk. She's right. I've never used a book in my entrepreneurship courses. Why would I? I mean, the day that book is printed, it's obsolete. So it's not like we have a body of knowledge that we have to convey. This is an ongoing process that changes every day. So the trick is to introduce those people to the mentors or the business people or the investors or whatever that are in the marketplace. And by the way, it doesn't have to be someone who's already got an immigration visa. It could be someone who's interested in getting it. And I would love to see that being a factor. Like if you can establish certain relationships and manage those relationships in a certain way, that gives you points toward immigration, right? I mean, if you spend like, 300 hours talking to a Canadian about your business, I'm ready to give you points for that.
Think about what we do with private sponsorship of refugees. And again, I know refugees are a specific case, but what we did with private sponsorship of refugees is we opened up the opportunity for ordinary citizens to take some responsibility for people's lives by making a commitment to investing a certain amount of financial capital and a certain amount of social capital. Now, for the most part, they weren't really involved in the selection process, although sometimes there were, when you dealt with certain faith groups, there were, we worked with a lot
Choices. You
of
had some
different
choices.
ones. But if you think about, the point that both of you are making, which is the social capital, the networks, the relationships, all of those things, the communication skills and so on are so important. Again, if we recognize we're talking small numbers, we're talking about really small numbers, why not think about a program that's comparable to the provincial nominee program for employees, where if we put in place these pre-arrival things and some networking and I always come back to dating as the model. You used to have arranged marriages and then you were allowed to pick your own partner, but it was all based on random. And now we got Lavalife and things that will do all the hard work for us. Like it seems to me you can think about similar evolution in how people are matched and identified. But why not have a program where if you have a certain number of people who say, I'm prepared to take a chance on this person and, for a couple of years, work with them. And that's enough to get them in the country with some, measures of whatever. Like, I just think that we're worrying too much about risk associated. You have to do the health screening, you have to do the security screening, but we got pretty good indications of success based on, and while I agree entirely, you can't predict who will be successful. You've got some indicators that, previous experience, some financial capital, some willingness to learn, adapt, and so on. It just seems to me it's relatively low risk to think about opening that up a little bit. And then, I would argue go hard on supporting people who are coming through based on the other criteria, including tradespeople, by the way, who very often have to be entrepreneurs as well. Lawyers, for heaven's
They're
sakes,
self-employed.
have to
Yeah,
be
that's
entrepreneurs. Like
Artists. Artists.
artists.
Now, are you
It's
familiar with owner's paper? Are you familiar with owner's paper? You
not.
sell it. If I have a company, if I have a business and I want to sell it, maybe the person that wants to buy it does. I want to sell it for $1 million. Maybe they can't get a bank loan, or they need a down payment for the bank loan. So I can sell them. I can say, okay, I'll give you $100,000 as a down payment for the bank loan. You owe me. That's my pay. You owe me that debt. In return, I'll stay with the company for a couple of years because it's in my interest that the company is successful, because then you'll pay me back at a good interest rate. So my last 2 years of working for my company, I'm going to help you start to take it over. I'm going to lend you the money to do it. I'm going to get interest on that money. You're going to pay me a salary to run the business while I help you establish yourself so that it's successful, so that you can pay back my paper. You can pay back my loan, right? It's a win-win-win, right? So that's kind of like what Wendy's referring to when she talks about the private sponsorship program, where people collectively got money together to sponsor someone. This could be a business a business sponsorship program where owner's paper could be the signal to bring the right person in, which is, I'm telling you, owner's paper almost guarantees success because the person that has been running the business, it's in their interest to make sure that the person taking it over is able to pay back the loan. So they make sure that it's, and they're not going to lend the money if the business is falling apart. They're only going to do it if the business really has the possibility of doing well. It's a fantastic way. I would love to see the government develop that.
Some of that in design is already happening on the Startup Visa program, and I want to take you to the challenges, right? Startup Visa program is kind of like sponsorship for the refugees. What do? If you're an entrepreneur, you send interests to these 90 designated organizations, and if they agree, they provide you a letter of support. With that letter of support,
investors. Those are investors. That's
no, no,
not.
no, 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 no. They're not, Benson. There are three classes. They're
Okay.
VCs, angel investors, incubators, and accelerators, right? The problem is abuse that it creates because of the unbalance of power between prospective immigrant and the designated organization.
Corruption.
Almost on an every week basis, I see someone coming here and they say, "I'm extorted. I'm being
Corruption.
I'm being
Absolutely.
threatened." Yes, by my
Right.
designated organization. They're saying, "Hey, you paid that much right now. If you don't want me to pull the letter of support, you have to pay this much extra." So the only way that I think we can police a system like this is to have clear metrics. And that's why, Wendy, having an idea about success is important for the integrity of the system, right? Because if I can police the designated organization based on a couple of metrics, and these metrics, let's discuss them a little bit. One thing that comes to my mind is revenue. Regardless of how you're making this revenue, if you go to Canada statistics, and I checked this before a meeting, Canada overall average revenue of SMEs in urban areas is $450,000. You're an immigrant. I'm not expecting you to hit 450,000 in year one or year two, but by year three or something, let's work something out that we can say, hey, if the entrepreneurs you're bringing, Mr. Incubator, Mrs. Accelerator, however you want to do it, you want to give them a network, you want to give them a module, you want to teach them this, teach them that, whatever you do, at the end of the day, one of the things that I want to measure you across is revenue. Continuity could be another thing, or let's brainstorm what factors.
Accountability, for sure. I
How many
think
people they employ? How many people they employ is it was one of the best measures.
Job,
Because
I'm not sure, Benson, because the reason why we're doing that in Canada, we're so over fixated on full-time employees. And so many of my clients, that they hire on contract basis. So, okay, maybe you don't necessarily mean employment.
Success. So we've studied
Measure of business.
We've studied panel study of entrepreneurial dynamics. We've followed businesses, nascent entrepreneurship. We followed for 15, even 20 years. And one of the best measures to understand who's doing well and who's not is how many people they have working for them. And I mean, it's not the only one, but it's fairly robust. How much money they make is sometimes people don't like to report it. It's not necessarily clear. Even revenue. How do you compare revenue in different types of businesses? Some businesses are high revenue, some are low, right? But I mean, if you're only one person, this is not a great entrepreneurial venture, right?
Yeah.
That's a problem. I mean, you can be one person and have a business, but we're hoping that the businesses, the small businesses in Canada are, 5 to 15 people, 5 to 20 people. That's what they typically represent.
Wendy, let's go to you. Do you have to leave?
I hate to bring this to an end, but I do really have to go to my next appointment.
So can you just, before you leave us, what do you think about these metrics? Because I can continue this with Benson for a few more minutes.
I think that Benson pointed out that it's very difficult to compare. So you have to have a nuanced understanding, and it can be a combination of different things. Like, we mark people in courses. Every course is not marked in the same way, but we have notions of what success are. And I think if you have valued, trusted advisors, like we do a lot of work with community-based financing, where you get together communities and they pick the best bets, and the success rates on some of those kinds of programs where you bring in people from the community that are assessing not based on some kind of theoretical metrics, but based on their knowledge and understanding of the people. Those are some of the most effective ways of making assessments. So I think you have to be flexible, but there has to be some accountability because, as you mentioned, the risks of exploitation when you have uneven power relationships are massive. And the risks of gaming the system, if you have lots of money, are also massive. So I really appreciated the chance to chat with both of you, and thanks so much.
All right,
Thank
I'm
you
gonna
very,
stay with
very much, Wendy, for volunteering your time. We'll be in touch. I think there's a lot that we can learn from your work, and I hope that you keep this conversation going so we can, put something together and give the government something that, it's workable. Thank you again. Enjoy
Great
the
to
rest of
see
your
you,
day.
Benson. I
Take
think
care.
it's
Nice to see
been
you, Wendy.
15 years.
I know it's been a while.
Okay, Benson, so the measures of success.
Okay, so look, I mean, you can categorize it. Here's how I would categorize the measures. You can have financial performance, and you can measure
Okay.
that by revenue, by profit margin, by cash flow, by ROI. Lots of ways we know. That's clear. That's
Okay.
easy stuff to measure. Then there's survival. How long do they survive? And for that, you need a time frame because most businesses don't last beyond 3 years, but if they do, then they're probably going to be durable. So you need a long-term time horizon, at least 5 years, to see if they survive. Then you can look
Okay.
at this issue of employment and job creation. How many people, how many jobs are created? Because that's a factor. Most small businesses in Canada have, we say less than 99 people, but typically they're between 5 and 15. So how many people have they hired? They start with one. How many do they hire? Then think of customer satisfaction, right? And how the customer base grows, right? How happy are people with the business? You could think of their online reviews. You could look at their repeat customer business. Then we could look at their innovation. How innovative are they? Are these new products? Because a lot of new innovations, they don't make money for years, right?
Yeah.
Amazon didn't make money for I
Yeah.
don't know what, 7 years before they made money.
Exactly.
Okay, so measuring the innovation is going to be a factor. And here's one that I think is extremely important, and that's community and social impact. Everything we do in the reframery, all the businesses we support, we make sure that they're environmentally sustainable and that they're community oriented. They're thinking about how to help their community. How do they get support? How do they participate in the community? Are they environmentally sustainable? Those are important things. And then what about the life satisfaction of the entrepreneur? Do we want to bring people over to burn out and freak out? Or do we want to have people have a good work-life balance or at least a satisfying life? Like, let's say if we're talking about economic immigrants, we want them to have greater well-being in Canada than they had in the country they left, right? That should
God
be a
bless
goal.
you, because
That should be a
nobody
goal,
cares
right?
about that. Nobody
So,
cares.
so
Nobody cares about the
hey,
mental
well,
well-being.
there. That should be there. And then finally, I would say
Yeah.
we probably want to make sure that they're complying vis-a-vis laws, that their licenses are correct, their insurance is there, and that they're paying tax, right? Because those are the things that are important. The whole idea about starting these businesses is that they're eventually taxpayers. So those are the categories that I'd say we need to look at if you're going to be looking at KPIs, you're going to be looking at measurements. Those are the categories we would need to measure the effectiveness of the outcome of these businesses, and it does take time, right? It
Okay.
takes time to measure it.
Let's now entertain another problem. Do you, for example, right now with the Startup Visa program, we give you PR as the prospective immigrant, right? If you get a letter of support, if you do all of those things, it's a PR first program. And then nobody really cares what happens after, right? So if we're just defining all these metrics, do we give them an opportunity by a work permit and say, hey, if after the 5 years you showed continuity, you showed some financial projection, you showed traction, what do you think about this? What do you think about how we can leverage immigration status into this measuring game?
Okay, so that 15% of the population that are entrepreneurs don't spend 100% of their time in starting their own businesses. It's a life cycle thing. So at a certain age, you're more likely to start a business. You might get a job and learn something. And so, I've been an entrepreneur all my life, but I've also I worked for a small company you may have heard of called General Electric. I was an engineer. I put in the second MRI in the world. Okay. So but I've always had my own businesses, even when I worked for the corporation. I had my own business. Okay. So, this is not a nominal. It's not black and white. You're an entrepreneur or you're working for someone. It's a life cycle issue. Someone who's more like has a proclivity to be an entrepreneur, that might show up at various times in their life. And it would be crazy to say, we're going to take away your PR because we brought you in as an entrepreneur and now you're working for someone, so that's it. We're investing in
Because that's a challenge. Because if you do PR first, then if we do PR first, we have to do a lot of work in doing the best we can with selection. Because after PR, how do you want to like measure them? But if you put PR at the end, then the mental well-being that you mentioned that nobody really cares about in the immigration system will go under the question, because these people have a lot of stress. They're saying, hey, you expected me to bring in $500,000. You gave me 20. That's the old Ontario program, by the way. Bring in $600,000, spend it in this business. You have only 20 months. You have to create this job. You have to be in that sector. And hey, by the way, if at the end of that happened and COVID happened or Trump happened, we're not going to agree that. So we're not going to give you the PR. I know it's a tough.
That was just a franchise. That was just a way to sell stupid franchises. That's all that's all we got out of that. You would open up a franchise and put your money in and hire a few people, and after a couple of years, you'd leave the franchise. That's all created. Didn't really create any innovation. Didn't create any new businesses, because who was making the decision? A bureaucrat, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I can't emphasize enough that bureaucrats don't understand. How would they know what's entrepreneurial? How would a university? We've got a program here where we have a master's in entrepreneurship. Only about 2 or 3% of those students ever start businesses. They all get jobs. Okay, because you can't, it's not something you study to be an entrepreneur and you become an entrepreneur. That's ridiculous. Okay, the fact of the matter is, business is a risk. We need to inspire and attract people that are willing to take those risks. We need to support them as much as possible in that process of risk taking, going in and out and in and out and failing. Because you only learn from failure. You don't learn from success.
100%. Yeah,
so
100%.
That means there are going to be a lot of failures. So if we bring in someone that's highly entrepreneurial, they're going to have multiple failures. And that means in between those failures, they might have jobs. We would want them to be able to have jobs. We don't want them to go back home because they failed the business. That's stupid. We brought them out here. They learn, begin getting that Canadian ecosystem experience. And then we're going to send them home because they failed as a business person? That's dumb. What we need to do is we need to just like we do with refugees, just like we do with other immigrants, we need to say, you're in. We're going to create an opportunity for you. We're going to help facilitate your starting a business if you want to, right? Or, maybe we say one attempt is a condition. Your conditional entry is predicated on you trying at least once. But if you fail, that's okay. You might start something later, right? That's all right.
Here's a proposal. Hey, prospective entrepreneur, bring in your money. I'll give you a figure. Let's say $500,000. Come to Canada. I'm not gonna $300,000. Whatever.
$500,000 is too much. You're going to attract just people that are gaming, that are buying. They're buying
X amount of dollars. Let's say X amount of dollars because we can X amount. You bring X amount. You show me with good faith that you deployed the X amount in active business, and then I give you flexibility. Go try.
So here's a better way. Here's even better.
Mm-hmm.
You bring in X amount, but it has to be matched by a Canadian, right? It has to be matched. If you just bring in the money, we don't care. But if you find a Canadian to match your investment, now you're in. So I don't care how much. If they bring in 100,000 and it's matched by Canadian,
okay, listen. Let's play the investor.
Investment. We're good.
Let's play the investor, because I'm a venture capitalist, right? So when you come in for me,
forget about venture capitalists. We're not getting you. We're not
investor. Let's say investor.
How
You
about
come
I've got a small business and I want to sell it? Remember that guy? And I'm going to use owner's paper.
That works for
Remember that
that.
guy?
That's perfect. I think for that
Right.
it's actually okay because you're coming in with the money X amount, you're buying a business or some I'm a fan of buying some interest of that business because that transition, that mentorship stays on. But if I want to start a business, right? And if I want
But then
to
you need to find a Canadian that's willing to match your investment. Because if the
sure,
Canadian's
but a
willing to
Canadian
match it, then chances are they're going to try and make it work. And they're not going to make it, they're not going to send it after stupid stuff. And they're not going to send it after the kind of stuff that bureaucrats choose. They're going to put it after something that makes sense, at least to a Canadian who understands the ecosystem. Now they can be wrong too, but the probability of them being wrong is much smaller because they're in the ecosystem.
no, I
Whereas someone
like
from
this.
another country,
I actually like it because it kind of like, it creates mutual interests.
exactly,
The only
exactly.
thing that I'm not so sure about is if I'm bringing a business to you as a Canadian, I'm like, Benson, do you want to match my investment? I'm bringing X amount. You say, but where is your traction? You're an immigrant. You don't know anything about Canada. Maybe I'm putting too much risk on you. So you have to, you are not a Canadian investor only. You're a Canadian investor entrepreneur. So that like, do you agree? That reduces the pool a little bit because the chat.
There's so much, there's all these angel investor funds, these dentists and lawyers that are looking to invest in small businesses. There's constant circulation and they're looking for ideas. You could have funds, mutual funds. You could have funds of where they would bring in 10 or 15 immigrants, and the hope that like a venture capital model. If one succeeds really well, they all do extremely well, right? So, but the thing is, here's the trick is don't let government lead the investment or make those investment decisions. Don't let government decide who's an entrepreneur and who isn't. Get Canadian investors, business people, entrepreneurs to make the decision of who would be a good entrepreneur to bring in. Now, there's always the issue of corruption. We have that corruption with a sponsorship program. I can't tell you how many churches take money in the back door to quote sponsor someone privately when really the money is it's come from the immigrant, not from the sponsors, right? That's a hard reality. So we're always going to get an element of that, but we
No,
can
we can
watch
take
it.
care of that. We can,
We
but
can
I
take care
love
of it.
this idea. But I love this idea for a design solution. Oh, Benson, thank you very, very much. We're at 1 hour and 29 minutes. So,
Yeah.
well,
Okay.
thank you again for your time. I think this was
Right.
a very fruitful conversation. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Any last words for us?
No, just I appreciate that you're doing this. I appreciate that you're trying to push the frontiers because we've got to. This is a great opportunity for us this time, with what's happening with us changing our export import model. This is the best time in the world for us to begin rethinking who we want to bring to Canada and how, under what conditions, and how we can support entrepreneurship. You are right we need to make this at the highest level. We have to get this in front of Carney. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think the time couldn't be better. And let's hope that we're able to create a more productive system that has us exporting more globally and leveraging the great entrepreneurship talent that we have in Canada, changing our culture so that we're a little more aggressive and a little more entrepreneurial, a little less passive and sort of laid back in our business activities. So thank you for organizing it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it edits together.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back to you for sure.